Okay. Now again, to find the x-intercept, we don't always have the equation in this convenient form. Sometimes we're given just an equation that ends up being a quadratic equation, as this is, and we don't have it in a form that's convenient to solution. Now we could always try to factor it. In the real world, we're not going to be likely to end up with anything we can factor. So what we do here with this function is we expand the x minus 4 squared here, and we get this form of the function. This would be a more common form for this. Okay? That's always cause for joy if we can take this and put it into this form, because this form is actually simpler. But that's not always easy to do. Actually, it's never really that hard, but it's a little more mathematically intense. So we don't want to talk about that just yet. We will. We just don't want to talk about it right now. Okay, so we understand that by expanding the x minus 4 squared, we get this. You can fill in the details. And that is of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, which is the general form of a quadratic equation. Okay, well, to solve the quadratic equation, we use the quadratic formula. That if the equation is in this form with an equals 0 here, something times x squared, something times x, and something else, we identify these three numbers and we can plug them into this formula. And we get our solutions, which will be the zeros of this function. So we do that. A is what's in front of x squared, so A is 2. B is what's in front of x, so B is negative 16. And I didn't write the negative sign on that. And C is 29, so C is 29. So we plug in negative 16 for B. Negative B then becomes a negative of negative 16. And then we have plus or minus this square root. Now this expression, b squared minus 4ac under the square root, is a very important expression. It's called the discriminant. Okay, so we have our discriminant here. Well, we're going to just plug in though. So b squared would be the square of negative 16. 4ac would be 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is 29. And the denominator would be 2a, 2 times the 2 we have for a. Okay, well, 16 squared is 256. 4 times, well, 8 times 29 is pretty close to 8 times 30. It's just 8 less. 8 times 30 is 240. 8 less than that is 232. And 2 times 2, of course, is 4. The arithmetic is very simple. We subtract here. We get 24 under the square root. And we separate this term and this term. 16 over 4 plus or minus the square root of 24 over 4. And of course 16 over 4 is 4. Now we want to simplify this square root of 24. We want to simplify the expression. The square root of 24, of course 24 being 4 times 6, is the square root of 4 times the square root of 6. And that's still over 4. And that's then square root of 4 being 2, 2 times the square root of 6 over 4, which is square root of 6 over 2. Now the 4 just keeps on going along. We're just worrying about simplifying the square root of 24 over 4. So we've simplified it down to square root of 6 over 2. Well, now I can write that as the square root of 6 over 4. Why? Well, because the square root of 6 over 4 is square root of 6 divided by square root of 4, and that's 6 over 2. So that confirms that we can do this. So this 2, when it comes in under the square root sign, has to come in as a 4 because we're now taking the square root of it. 6 over 4 is 3/2. So now this expression is simplified down to 4 plus or minus square root of 3/2. Does that look familiar? Yeah, it's the same thing we got here. Okay? So, coming up, we're going to emphasize the fact that the x-coordinate of the vertex is easily found here. We note that, well, and it's easily related to the quadratic formula. So we'll emphasize that next.